As this article from The Conversation states, the term disability covers a number of functional limitations: physical, sensory, mental, and intellectual. These can range from mild to severe and might affect someone at any time across their lifespan, from an infant born with an intellectual impairment to an older adult who becomes unable to walk or see. And actually about 1 in 6 people globally have some sort of disability. So it's not actually that uncommon, however it's treated as though it is. The way that society is structured kind of actually treats people like they're unwanted if they have a disability. Whether we are on about how buildings are designed, how open plan offices actually function, the sheer level of bureaucracy it takes to be able to even try and get a diagnosis, and also the medical gaslighting that happens when people are actually trying to get a diagnosis and trying to get help. Then you add on top of that all of the extra costs of living with a disability in a world where you're meant to be constantly fully functioning in whatever way capitalism deems that to be. All of this is coming from a cis-het, white and able-bodied woman. Like, I've dealt with a lot of medical misogyny over the years, my debilitating pain not being taken seriously, I have collapsed at a gym because of undiagnosed heart issues and got hospitalized for that, and also despite the fact that I've had cysts burst, which has actually sent me to hospital, like, I still get completely shoved aside all the time saying that I'm overreacting to my pain when I can't walk, talk, physically move. But that is all to say, this is coming from a point of privilege because obviously, like I said, cis-het white woman here. Let alone if you're neurodivergent, have any kind of disability, or heaven forbid, if you're anything other than white. I've already covered ableist attitudes in my 2000 series in the 3rd video of that. However, while some slurs may have kind of fallen by the wayside, ableist attitudes are still so prevalent today to the point that TV shows, I was asking for good representation to see if that was a thing that actually existed, and oh, there were a few, but people had so many problems with most of the shows. I just want to say a huge amazing thank you to everybody that replied to that survey, because you were generous enough with not only your time but also your experience and that level of trust in me. I really do appreciate it, and I hope that this video does provide some good and some help. The survey results. So we all know that this is very unscientific data because obviously this went out to my audience and there's a small sample size relatively because it's just over 170 people involved, but I still think that we can get really good qualitative data from this. And also, I am not an expert here, okay? I'm not a scientist, I'm not a I'm not that person. Maths is also really hard for me. Numbers left and right, I can't. Okay. So looking at the countries where people were from, nearly half of people were actually from USA, which doesn't surprise me at all because most of my audience is from there. Followed by people in the UK. There were quite a few countries in Europe, a couple in Asia, the Netherlands, South America, some people in Australia, and also here in Aotearoa. So it's kind of global, but there's definitely skewed data when it comes to where exactly in the world this is coming from, but that will be informing where I've actually pulled information from for this video. When it comes to the conditions that people had, the most common were ADHD, autism, long COVID, chronic pain, POTS, which is this on the screen now, depression, anxiety, CPTSD, PTSD, endometriosis, Crohn's disease, PCOS, which is polycystic ovarian syndrome, bipolar disorder, dyscalculia, dyslexia, anosmia, which is the inability to smell, deafness, blindness, fibromyalgia, celiac disease, arthritis of varying kinds, Tourette's, OCD, Lyme disease, also sadly various kinds of cancer, hypermobility and limited mobility, and there were some others as well. So as you can see, this is a wide range of conditions, and people didn't just deal with one most times, it was actually multiple. So that just adds on extra layers of challenges, especially when it comes to medical issues, when it comes to cost of things, when it comes to work life, school life, all sorts of stuff. So now you know the kind of data that we're dealing with. I'm also not going to be diving into each individual's personal experience because I value people's privacy. There are a few questions at the end where I did ask what people can do to change things, what people would like businesses to change, what politics they'd like to change, and if there's anything else they want to add. From that I will be drawing from directly, but everything else. I'm generalizing stuff because I do value people's privacy. So anyway, let's get on to future me and dive into these issues and also focus on what we can do to make positive change.
You ought to go back to Dr. Raymond.
I did, Blanche. He said I'm fine.
Get a second opinion.
She did. She went to Dr. Schlesinger.
Well, then, you are fine. Now, you want to hear my idea?
She is not fine, Blanche. Look at her.
I didn't say she looks fine. I said she was fine.
Diagnosis struggles. So this was a real mixed bag when it came to your responses. For some people it was actually relatively easy to get a diagnosis because that happened when you were young or when your children are young. So for example, if someone is born with a physical ailment or blindness, or like what we have in our family with cystic fibrosis. But for most people it was an uphill battle trying to get a diagnosis because a lot of it actually depended on doctors believing people, on people's parents being able to actually afford the test and have the time to be able to get the testing done and actually know kind of what's going on. And there's also a challenge of things maybe not presenting quite so quickly or being as visibly obvious. So many respondents to the survey said that doctors just weren't believing them, saying that they were making it up in their head, that they were faking it, that it couldn't possibly be that, like it's not possible for them to feel that much pain. And this has been in place for a lot of people since childhood. People have dealt with being misdiagnosed as well, with a lot of people, in particular women, actually saying that they got misdiagnosed as having anxiety when it was actually other health conditions. Funny, that's happened to me too. I know how annoying it is. You can have multiple things at the same time. Now, I do stress all the time that it's all relative to what each person has experienced, but if someone is saying that they are in a constant level of pain or that pain is the worst that they've ever dealt with, maybe just listen to them. But this seems to just not happen for so many people. Sadly, it can take years to get a diagnosis, in particular for people with neurodivergent. Say, for example, autism or ADHD, it presents very differently in women to in men. Whereas when it comes to girls, parents in particular have struggled to actually get doctors to take them seriously, and it's taken years to get any traction on this, like, because parents did actually reach out to me as well on this, and it's quite concerning, the medical misogyny that's in place from infancy. So many of you have had to wait until adulthood to get a diagnosis, and the thing is that that is not a cheap thing to do because a lot of the time it gets paid for out of pocket. Also here in Aotearoa, I've told you that I knew someone who had to pay $5,000 to actually get their diagnosis. This financial barrier to entry means that people are turning to self-diagnosis, which comes with its own host of problems. But to me at least, it's a symptom of a broken system. Doctors also have fat phobia and have told many patients that if you lose weight, then symptoms of X, Y, Z will just go away. And it's like, no. May I just remind you once again, BMI is BS. We don't need to rely on that. The fat phobia just adds on even more barriers to be able to actually get the diagnosis that would actually help them. And the same thing goes for people that dealt with incredibly painful periods, being told that it's just anxiety or just the fact that they don't really understand how bodies work and that periods do hurt. And it's like, no, if you are in debilitating pain, if you are blacking out, if you're dealing with migraines, and if you're vomiting, I'm pretty sure that's not normal. And so a bunch of you sadly had said that they'd been misdiagnosed as having anxiety when they had undiagnosed endometriosis or polycystic ovarian syndrome. People's struggles to actually get a diagnosis range from 7 months where they were repeatedly having seizures all the way up to 20 years. There's also another issue where people didn't want to get a diagnosis because it would mean that they wouldn't be able to get a job or emigrate. That is a whole other issue to dive into when it comes to immigration. I've already talked about how I'm very pro-immigration, especially considering we're coming to a climate crisis. We need to be able to save people, okay? Now, there are some mental health issues that society has deemed to be acceptable in a way. I've also made a video about all of the issues with that up here when it comes to, say for example, anxiety and depression. But say for example someone's bipolar, or they have got narcissistic personality disorder, or they've got dissociative identity disorder. When it comes to those things, how are those portrayed in the media? Not very well, you'd say. These ones in particular get demonized an awful lot. I mean, when it comes to famous people that we can even think of, what, Kanye West is what people think of when they think of bipolar? That's not exactly helpful, is it? And when you look at all of the movies and media that's been made around these things, It's not positive. Other people have already talked about that. Medical gaslighting is a very real issue, and it takes years off people's lives as they're struggling to actually try and find out what's wrong with them and find ways to handle it, to be able to carry on with life and be a productive member of society, because that's what we're all wanted to be. This has been written about a lot. It's especially prevalent for women, the LGBTQIA+ community, and the BIPOC community. I don't know if you know this, but women have only been included in medical trials since the 1990s because they thought that the male figure was able to actually assess everything for everyone. So it's kind of like medicine's been made by men for men, kind of excluding a bunch of people with that. And I really want to clarify here, when I'm on about gaslighting, I'm not on about the therapy speak version, which just boils it down to lying, because it's not just lying, okay? It's actually like a proper thing, where someone who is in a position of power uses manipulation tactics to make someone doubt their own life, to make them doubt their own sanity. Like, that's what we're on about when I say gaslighting.
I racked up medical supplies costs just to be able to go to the bathroom, to be able to shower, and you'd be surprised to find out that most insurance companies don't cover those ancillary costs. Even though they're technically medically necessary, they don't say that it is.
Now, when reading studies and papers for this, a lot of the language that was used was really dehumanizing in my opinion. Like lots of words like burden, loss of productivity, increased cost, all in a very negative way. So for example, in the Economic Costs of Childhood Disability, a literature review, the burden is heavier on households in developing countries as most of the costs are paid out of pocket, leading to impoverishment of the whole family. Efforts should be directed to avoid preventable childhood disabilities and to support disabled children and their households to make them more independent and increase their productivity. Maybe I'm too sensitive a person, but labeling someone as a burden is incredibly dehumanizing to me. And also, can you imagine like having that sort of label put on you and have your existence be deemed a burden? I'm sorry, but there is something so wrong with that to me. I also read The Extra Cost of Living with a Disability, a review and agenda for research, which analysed 20 studies across 10 different countries, which were mostly wealthy, but that also does reflect my audience because I've already looked at those analytics. As with most things, more research is needed, and they do stress this in the study. I wonder why disability and accessibility to healthcare and all that other stuff isn't really studied all that much. One study reported that 44% of participants report $2,889 of unmet needs. Another study finds a similar proportion of 45% of parents and children with disabilities felt that their children did not receive equipment or services due to lack of money to pay for it. And yet another study finds that people with disabilities incur $577 of transportation costs, but would require $1,822 of transportation costs if they were not constrained financially. Basically, it's really hard to actually assess the genuine cost of disability since there are so many people who are just going without. And this is something which you also brought up all the time as well. Like whether it was halving the medication, just going without so many different things because you're unable to actually get them. This is something which impacts so many people, and also each person's needs vary because everyone is individual. It's so varying around the place, and if you can't afford it, you're just not going to get it, so it's not even counted in your budget, you know? And from this article, our reviewers led us to believe that in even well-intended anti-poverty efforts and social protection schemes that do not take into consideration the additional cost of living with a disability will leave millions of people who have disabilities and their families in poverty. People are afraid to share the fact that they're in a relationship because it would mean that their disability benefit would be taken away, and they're still struggling to get by on that. And also, sadly, people are stuck in abusive households because they're unable to work, so they've got nowhere to be able to actually turn to. They're stuck in this system because also when it comes to means testing in order to be able to actually get disability payments, basically financial freedom is never going to be possible for a bunch of people who are unable to work. So home ownership, for example, that's not going to happen unless you magically inherit it or something. So it comes down to people having to have barely any savings in order to be able to actually get the disability checks to come through. So you're just constantly stuck on this incredibly low amount of money which doesn't even cover everything that you need. It's almost like people are sort of stuck in this limbo where the government's just saying,
life end in line and be grateful too.
at the same time as punishing them for not being like a normal member of society, whatever normal even is. I guess according to capitalist terms, being productive all the time and then spending all of that money on goods and services to make the economy go round. People struggle to get the aid that they need, the medication they need, the appointments they need to see specialists and doctors, because even doctors have got huge wait lists. I have to go across the city to go see my doctor, and I have to go to a doctor quite often, I have to say. Again, I've got a lot of health issues of my own. People were also sharing that the levels of bureaucracy in place in order to be deemed eligible to get disability payments was so convoluted and challenging to navigate, it made it nearly impossible, and people got turned down, like, that were dealing with like actual disabilities and issues, which meant that they weren't able to work, but they kept getting turned down for it. And it's this huge headache on top of everything. Also, for people who deal with executive function issues, that means that the forms and all of the loopholes you have to go through to be able to actually try and get aid, it's incredibly unfriendly in terms of actually being able to do that, because it's so hard to actually follow this like mountain of paperwork. There were a couple of countries like in the Netherlands and Germany where people actually said that it was really easy for them to be able to get help because obviously social nets are in place, which is wonderful. Like, please, the rest of the world, can we catch up? That would be great. It does mean having higher taxes, but that is a price I am willing to pay. Also, tax the rich and tax churches maybe too, that would be good. And similarly, for those of you who were lucky enough to have families that were secure enough in their financial position, meaning that they could actually support you, those people are okay as well. Basically, unless you're from money or you live in like a more kind of socialist, Democrat-leaning country, good luck. You're not wanted. That's kind of how you're made to feel. From the experiences that you've shared, if you do get government aid, that doesn't even cover most of the costs anyway. Same as if people have to claim insurance to get things done, a lot of the time you still have to pay the top-up amounts on that. So it doesn't really pay for everything. There are different systems in different countries around the world. I know that in France it's different, in the US it's different, here it's different, everywhere it's different. But for basically everyone, you still had to pay out-of-pocket stuff.
I'm gonna offer you a job.
Oh my God, wow, thank you.
It'll be freelance, which means you'll get no health benefits. But let's be honest, you have so many pre-existing conditions, you'd never get covered anyway.
Working was a challenge for a lot of respondents. Whether they couldn't work, which was actually 25 out of 167 people that answered that question, because they were dealing with a disability or illness, or because the part-time work that they would be able to do would be too strenuous for them to actually do. So you know, in the interview process, since so many of you actually identified as having autism, like, that is a very challenging process for people. There's this whole extra effort of masking, and then also because of open plan offices, that's not exactly a very friendly environment because it's very overstimulating, including having things like fluorescent lights, a lot of chatter going on all the time. I'm a highly sensitive person myself, so I get really easily distracted. Like, I'll just latch onto it if someone makes a face or something. Like, everything's like whoa to me, I guess. Like, I struggle with reading even. For people that are dealing with autism, being in an office environment is like sensory overload. Some of you have instead turned to work from home jobs, which would good. However, there's not very many of those around for some reason. It's almost like companies that need to pay the rent on their giant office buildings instead of converting them into, you know, homes for people that are houseless. Also, parents of children who have disabilities have had to find jobs that are really flexible, and that was a huge challenge in itself. Now, for those of you who are able to work, again, it was quite a mixed bag of experiences. A lot of people dealt with discrimination, a lot of people dealt with losing jobs quite often because they weren't able to actually keep up with the workload that was expected of them. It was a fairly even split when it came to talking about your disability or neurodivergence or illness at work. So some people spent a lot of effort actually masking it and making sure that people didn't know, and just hiding it behind like saying I'm tired or whatever, like say if you're dealing with chronic fatigue or whatever. And then there were other people who actually spoke to their managers about it. Some had a good experience, a lot had kind of like a, oh, we'll make some accommodations for you, but then it's not really actually making accommodations for people. Or their direct manager was good, however that everything else wasn't. So it's very much a mixed bag. Bringing it back to the interview process, so you know how if you have to take time off because you're really sick with an illness or disability or something, hone in on it. It's like, oh, what's that 6-month gap? And it kind of puts you on the spot in an interview to have to kind of expose your medical issues. It's like, what if something really traumatic had actually happened in that time, and then you have to just say that when you've just met these people? It's like, oh yes, let me just lay out my traumatizing life story for you to judge if I'll be a productive enough member of your company. If there is a gap, unless it's for, you know, procreating, because of course everybody must have babies, there is so much scrutiny over any time that people aren't being constantly productive. I also want to raise, there were people that weren't able to drive, and this is a huge hindrance, especially because so many cities, towns, everything is car-centric. People with disabilities are allowed to not be paid minimum wage even. So because the reasoning is given, their outputs are less than others. Oh, I hate this so much. Even here in Aotearoa, that's only gonna be abolished in 2025. Mid-2025 even. But it's the case for a lot of places around the world. Here in Aotearoa, if you're disabled, the average hourly wage is $5 an hour, whereas the minimum wage is $22.70 an hour. I do want to say there were some really good experiences that you shared with me though, with amazing bosses and workplaces that actually like took care of people and had like a good range of understanding of stuff. 24 said that they actually had good working experience with regards to their disability, neurodivergence or illness, but only 12 of them said that that was because of really good accommodations being put in place at work. The rest, it was just because they were able to actually work there.
Even if everybody gets it, like, yeah, people are gonna die, which is terrible, but like, inevitable?
So do you remember that video from Vanessa Hudgens? Because I certainly do, because everybody hated her for it. What's happened? It's kind of like every politician has just turned into Lord Farquaad.
Some of you may die, but it's a sacrifice I am willing to make.
But most people are in agreement with Lord Farquaad here. This is incredibly depressing for me because I've made this very clear for the whole time about the fact that we need to look after each other. We're dealing with an airborne virus which has killed millions of people, it's made millions of people disabled, and it's impacting so many people's lives in varying different ways. Like, you know that I recently got Rona from a wedding, which really annoyed me. I'm still working through my anger on that, okay? I'm working through it. But you only see this tiny little sliver of a facade. You don't see me collapsing. You don't see me blacking out. I did everything in my power to avoid getting this. Not just for me, but for everybody else. I'll just say that if I didn't have Brandon help me all the time and I didn't have such an understanding boss, I don't know where I would be right now. Each country handled the panoramic very differently. There were some that pretended it wasn't even a thing. There were some that decided, hey, herd immunity means just meaning that everyone can get infected. Whatever, it's fine. It's not how it works. Whatever, who needs scientists, right? I asked if there were positive or negative things to come during the panoramic. There were some negative things, absolutely for sure, because some people were forced to carry on working anyway in public-facing sectors where people weren't wearing masks and stuff, and they dealt with health issues themselves. They were incredibly worried about getting stuff, including for their family members. And then there were other people who were sadly stuck at home in really abusive environments, but they had no way to escape that. So for some people that are neurodivergent, they really struggled not being in a regular school setting, for example, because that was kind of how they had their stability, their escape, everything was there. But there were a bunch of good things that were actually put in place because of the panoramic, like flexible working, like flexible hours, like work from home ability, like being able to have your medicine delivered to you, like telehealth services, like grocery delivery was so much easier, meal delivery, like all sorts of stuff that people weren't able to do before, and mostly because workplaces said, we can't have people work from home, everybody has to come to the office, it's the only way that we can function. And it's like, no, actually, you were just being really ableist before, because there are people that can't go to the office to work. There are people who get too overstimulated by going to the office to work, but you didn't want to do anything before because that would have helped just them. But when it's impacting, you know, the CEO, then it kind of matters. And this got brought up by a huge amount of people, was the fact that public seating spaces and store seating places just vanished. They just got taken away. I don't really know exactly why. People have been forced back into offices where people are not masking, so people are being exposed to Rona, to flu, to all this other stuff, and they're dealing with like their own health issues. People who are at risk are having to go into the office because companies are now just like, we're back to normal, everybody, we solved the problem, come on and be productive. And same as it forces neurodivergent people back into the office, whereas like from what you were telling me at least, it was so much better being able to work from home because you didn't feel like you had to mask it all. Like there was so much less pressure and feeling like you had to be constantly aware of stuff and make sure that you know how you're presenting to everybody else. The way that things have just done a complete 180 flip to basically be like, oh, if you have any health issues, you have to go live under a rock now because we want to just carry on like whatever. If we get Rona, it's totally fine. We just treat it as a cold. It is not a cold. There are brain issues, there are lung issues, there are heart issues, there are so many issues, even with a mild case of Rona. Like there is so much science about it, but hey, we're not really hearing about it all that much because I guess it doesn't really pay the bills to keep on reminding people like, hey, people are actually getting really incredibly sick from this if they aren't dying. These people are worthless and it doesn't matter. The world carries on the way it used to, despite the fact that that wasn't working for anybody before and it was also killing the planet before.
So the question I keep coming back to is, if these apologies don't really get us anywhere, if the same problems keep happening, what can we do?
Now we're moving on to the positive part of the video. What can we do? Because you know I like to find solutions. Things basically fell into 3 different categories about areas that we can have influence over to make positive change. So first off, we've got individual and interpersonal. Second, we have workplace and business, and third, we have politics. And let's start off with interpersonal, you know, like the smallest circle of influence that we have. The overwhelming response from about 70% of people was just asking people to listen, believe people, and be kind. That doesn't sound all that radical, but the fact that about 70% of people had to actually bring that up really does show how inherent ableism is around the place.
You'd better start listening to your patients. They need to be heard. They need caring. They need compassion. They need attending to. You know, someday, Dr. Bud, you're going to be on the other side of the table. And as angry as I am, and as angry as I always will be, I still wish you a better doctor than you were to me.
Also, a disability doesn't define somebody. Like, everyone's multifaceted, everyone's got their own interests in different things.
Disability is value neutral. It isn't a good thing and it isn't a bad thing. It's just a thing. We don't need statements like, oh, that is so sad. I am so sorry. Or, I'm lucky enough to not have anyone with a disability in my family. Wow, okay.
Another thing which came up time and again was to ask people if they need help before doing so. Say for example, you see someone sort of struggling with something, you're just like, oh, let me just grab your wheelchair and move you. It's like, that's really infantilizing and dehumanizing to that person. The thing is, not saying to stop helping, just saying ask before you help. It's kind of like, you know how consent is a big thing that everybody's been focusing on for a while now. That doesn't just apply in the bedroom. Disabilities, illnesses, neurodivergence, they can all be invisible. If you want to donate to charities, donate to ones which are actually created by people that are dealing with the disability, illness, neurodivergence. I'll just put up Autism Speaks for a second. I'll also link an article down below of exactly why not to support them, but they are terrible. If you have someone that is neurodivergent in your life, you can just ask them how communication works best for them, because social cues may not be all that easy for people to pick up on. Same as using like tone indicators if you're typing text out or something. That is super helpful for people as well. Multiple requests for people to wear masks and get boosted. Hard agree. And also just realize that everyone's different and they may not be comfortable with sharing their health issues with you, which, you know, I think everybody can relate to, because not all of us feel safe to be able to do that and may have had like multiple issues, even bringing that up in the past.
You know what you did. Let's go, Ryan.
Moving on to businesses and workplaces. So this is whether you work somewhere or if you are someone that is higher up on the echelon and you are involved in hiring practices or whatever. The biggest request was to give people back seating options in not only workplaces but also businesses, you know, like shopping malls, like that sort of stuff. People need to be able to sit down. Give greater accessibility options for people's workplaces, whether that is chairs for cashiers or distancing things so that wheelchairs can fit through easily. Many requests to put in place quiet hours so people can shop or do their business things without like loud music and like really bright lights and stuff. Flexible working is very important, whether that's allowing people to control their hours a bit more, or being able to work from home, or provide accommodations at the office, which would mean that they'd be able to actually work easily. I just want to put this out there quickly. If a business is only hiring able-bodied neurotypical people, you're only going to be getting a very small sort of like view on things. Like, you're missing out on a wealth of knowledge, a wealth of lived experience and skills and talents that is just going wasted because you're just like, no, this is all we want. A bunch of requests for no flashing or strobing lights. I have someone in my family who lives with epilepsy, so this is something that I'm well aware of, and that's exactly why I don't include flashing lights, or I put up warnings. Include more remote services like curbside pickup and delivery options. Mobility assistance provides huge benefits to people. A request for having a different type of menu for all the disabilities that affect reading. Include the option of captions on everything. And also there's this one thing in the UK which is called the Sunflower Lanyard scheme, in which some businesses offer support to both workers and customers in the form of quiet areas, guidance and escorts. So getting your workplace looking into implementing something that's similar to this, or even that if you are in the UK, that would be great.
Everybody sucks. Except us.
You know how I feel about people that aren't us.
And finally, we move on to everybody's favourite, politics. I know that people think that politics is just this sided thing, but politics impacts kind of everything. Vote, obviously. Advocate for people who may not be able to advocate for themselves well enough because they are of a minority group, such as, like I've said before, LGBTQIA+ people, people that are dealing with health issues, like this entire video, all of this stuff that I've been bringing up. When you're voting or a politician is bringing something up, think about the following things and see how much of this they're actually taking into consideration. Like, for example, when a politician writes a policy, are they writing it with accessibility in mind first? Or even including that at all? There are requests for universal benefits for individuals with disabilities based on their needs. Teach about diversity in school, like ticking, LGBTQIA+, neurodivergence, destigmatizing mental illness, etc. UBI, universal basic income, so then people don't have to rely on disability payments. In the US, I do kind of feel like you have the most gripes, which does make sense because single-payer healthcare laws came up an awful lot. I don't really know enough about that, but so many brought it up that it's definitely an issue. Another thing which got brought up was marriage equality for people on disability benefits. Also, huge requests to simplify the application process to get disability benefits. Requests to improve the accessibility and reliability of the public transportation system. Include long COVID as being a disability. There are some places which do this, but most don't. Decriminalise hugs and put caps on how much medications cost. That would be really good. See what happened with insulin. Increase funding for research into chronic conditions and conditions that affect women. Like I said before, it's been kind of like pushed to the wayside for quite a while. So more funding, please, especially for science. There were a few requests to get rid of capitalism. I know it seems kind of unlikely, but I'll just chuck it out there anyway, it'd be great. Now, there were many requests to fully reform the healthcare system. I don't know how much of an impact this video will have, but maybe, you know, just making sure that you're supporting things like nurses and doctors and like all the people that are like trying to make sure that people are okay, because there are specialist shortages. Everyone's going to work in private instead, and that's not very helpful. Healthcare systems in a lot of countries around the world need a lot of work, and I want to highlight this as well. Tax cuts will not help things get better. In fact, taxes need to raise in order for people to be able to have like a better quality of life overall. This could quite easily be solved if we just taxed a certain number of people properly and close those tax loopholes that they're currently exploiting, and maybe also tax the churches too. That would be fantastic. But yeah, anytime that you're seeing a politician like go on and on about the fact that tax cuts need to happen, just maybe side-eye them, because you don't get good public change from tax cuts. Obviously I can't cover everything that people submitted in this survey because, like I said, 184 responses, people put paragraph after paragraph after paragraph each for all of my 15 questions. I've really tried to find the common themes and boil things down, but I really do hope that I've been able to do some justice with this video. I hope that I've given you some hope, some tangible actions that people can take. It's not just about impacting one person's life, this is about improving everybody's quality of life. One thing which people brought up time and again was the fact that people become disabled at any point, like basically as we age, if we're lucky enough to reach old age, most of us will actually have some sort of disability. So it actually makes positive impact for everybody to live in like not an ableist society. Like, it just makes sense, even if you're thinking from a selfish position. Having a disability means often being treated as less than, as an afterthought, as like an exclusion off to the side. And that's not acceptable. Like, I think that all of us, like the fact that you clicked on this video and even made it this far, you can actually recognize that. I think everybody can recognize that. But I also feel like there's sort of like this internalized ableism that people have been dealing with, even if they don't want to admit it. Maybe this video has actually helped show you that, from actually showing how many systems are so broken, and how things are just sort of built in many places around the world to kind of hurt people if they are disabled, to kind of exclude them if they're disabled, like punish them. So maybe that's kind of why people have got this sort of internalized ableism, because there's such a fear about it, so people don't even want to face it. It would just be better for everybody if the whole world was a lot more accessible and, you know, looked after each other. That would be... wouldn't that be lovely? I had an extra box at the end for people to add in anything else that they wanted to add. Thank you very much for all of those very sweet compliments that people left. But I wanted to end on this saying, every person has worth by nature of existing. Every person is deserving of respect, love and happiness. Unlearn that a person's worth is dependent on what they can do. I really want to say a huge thank you once again for everybody that completed the survey and shared your trials and tribulations and life experience. Like, honestly, like I said, I really hope that I've done you some justice with this video. There's not going to be a video next week because I'm going to be working on my age gap video, and I'll be having a survey up again for people to complete, so then you can give me your thoughts on that, because I know it's a touchy subject from what I saw from my fixation on 18 video. That got... whew, it's still going off. There's a lot of comments on there, and it's been a lot seeing that. So I just wanted to say that will be coming. It's just I need a bit more time, and also this gives people a bit more space to include their input as well. So yeah, thank you lovelies so very much for watching, and I'll see you again next time. Bye.